You think you know her story. You think you understand what she feels when she acts distant, when she goes silent, when she stops chasing. But the truth, the real truth, is something nobody ever tells you. She acted cold, yes, but not because she didn't care. She acted cold because loving too much without being seen, without being valued, is quietly destroying her from the inside. And you've been watching it happen without even realizing it. You've assumed her silence meant indifference. You've assumed her calm meant she was unaffected. You've convinced yourself that walking away was easy for her. But here's the reality that will shock you. She didn't break when you left. She broke long before that. She broke silently, alone, in ways you'll never witness. Every unspoken word, every swallowed tear, every moment she swallowed her needs to protect the relationship. All of that built pressure inside her, pressure that eventually had to find release. And that release isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's quiet, deliberate, and permanent. By the time you notice, the version of her who loved without boundaries, who gave without measure, who bent herself to hold you close, that version no longer exists. You didn't just lose her. You lost access to the strength she built from surviving the very pain you caused. And this isn't about regret. It's about awakening. It's about realizing that love isn't about endurance. It's about balance. It's about recognizing when giving too much becomes a danger to yourself. If you think her silence is weakness, think again. If you think her coldness is apathy, think again. Because in that quiet, in that calm, in that withdrawal, she's not broken. She's evolving. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what it costs to take her for granted, and why some losses can never be reversed. You see, when someone acts cold, most people immediately assume it's because they don't care. They assume that distance equals detachment, that silence equals indifference. But that's almost never the truth. In reality, the cold exterior is often a mask, a carefully constructed shield designed to protect a heart that feels too much. She didn't wake up one day and decide, "I'll be indifferent." No, she acted cold because she was overwhelmed, because her love and her attachment were met with inconsistency, neglect, or misunderstanding. When caring becomes dangerous, when giving becomes exhausting, the mind and the heart naturally retreat. Silence becomes the safest weapon and the only refuge. You have to understand emotional expression is not a one-size-fits-all phenomenon. Some people break loudly, crying and yelling and demanding to be heard. Others collapse quietly, folding inwards, replaying every interaction in their minds, analyzing every word, every gesture, every sign of approval or rejection. And the ones who do this quietly are the ones who can be the most profoundly affected. Their pain doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek validation. It sits in the shadows, eroding them from the inside out while the world assumes they're untouched. She acted cold because showing her vulnerability would have exposed her to even more pain. Every time she softened, every time she revealed her warmth or her longing, she risked being ignored, dismissed, or taken for granted. So she learned to hide. She learned to contain the chaos of her feelings behind a calm surface. And the more she gave without receiving the same energy in return, the thicker that surface became. It wasn't indifference. It was survival. And this is where most people fail to see the truth. They confuse survival mechanisms for emotional emptiness. They mistake the protective shell for the absence of depth. Think about what this silence really means. It means nights spent questioning herself. It means replaying conversations over and over, searching for a moment where she could have spoken up but didn't. It means wrestling with the tension between loyalty, love, and the undeniable truth that her heart was being strained beyond what was healthy. She didn't lash out because she wanted to hurt you. She didn't act cold to punish you. She acted cold because every ounce of her energy was being funneled into keeping herself from breaking completely. Every quiet gesture, every subtle withdrawal was her way of saying, without words, "I need space to survive." to reclaim myself. And this is where the tragedy lies. People often interpret this behavior as lack of interest, but the reality is that she is suffering more deeply than anyone outside her mind could imagine. Her heart isn't detached, it's protecting itself. Her silence isn't an absence of feeling, it's a fire burning quietly beneath the surface. You might look at her and see composure, maybe even strength. But what you don't see is the battle raging inside, the constant negotiation between longing and self-preservation, between hope and the realization that she cannot keep giving indefinitely without reciprocity. The paradox of the human heart is that love can be boundless, but the person loving is not. She may have acted cold, but it wasn't a statement about you. It was a statement about the imbalance she endured silently, a boundary she had to create to stop herself from losing more than she could bear. And this is what most people fail to understand. Coldness is not the opposite of love. Sometimes it is the final act of it. Sometimes it is the only way to protect what remains. So the next time you witness someone retreat, when someone distances themselves without explanation, don't assume you understand the story. Don't assume the silence is empty. It's often the opposite. Silence can carry the heaviest weight of all. It can carry pain that words could never fully capture, sacrifice that will never be acknowledged, and the quiet rebuilding of a self that was stretched to the edge. She acted cold not because she didn't feel, but because she had to shield herself from feeling too much in a world that demanded more than she could safely give. And here's the lesson that should stay with you: never underestimate the power of quiet pain. The absence of tears, the lack of complaints, the calm exterior, none of that means the person is unaffected. Sometimes the loudest suffering is silent, and the strongest people are the ones carrying the heaviest invisible burdens. Respect that, recognize that, and most importantly, learn that if someone retreats silently, it is rarely about you. It is always about the self-preservation of a soul that has loved too deeply and quietly endured too much. Because in the end, silence is not weakness, it is survival. And the person who masters silence, who protects themselves even when it means acting cold, is not broken, they are awakening. What people rarely understand is that losing someone doesn't always break them because of your absence. Sometimes, the real fracture happens long before you even leave. It happens in the quiet accumulation of moments where they gave more than they received, where their heart stretched itself to the limit, trying to make something work that was already imbalanced. She didn't break the moment you walked away. She broke the moment she realized how much of herself she had been giving, often unnoticed, often unappreciated, often taken for granted. That is the kind of breaking that leaves scars, the kind of quiet fracture that nobody sees until it's fully formed. You see, love is a dangerous thing when it is not reciprocated. When you give fully and consistently, expecting connection, warmth, and respect in return, but find yourself met with inconsistency, distraction, or disregard, the mind starts to record a subtle pattern. It's a pattern that whispers, slowly but persistently, that her worth is being measured against someone else's convenience, that her effort is being treated as optional, and that her heart is being tested in ways it should never be tested. And the danger lies not in her love, but in the compromise she makes in order to maintain it. Each time she overlooked neglect, each time she forgave without acknowledgement, each time she silenced her needs to avoid conflict, she was sacrificing pieces of herself, pieces she might never reclaim. The tragedy is not in the love itself, it's in the imbalance. Giving and taking is the rhythm of human relationships, and when the rhythm is broken, it creates a subtle erosion of the soul. She didn't lose herself overnight. She lost herself in increments, in the small daily concessions that seemed harmless at the time. She gave more than was returned because she hoped that her patience, her understanding, her devotion would be enough to sustain the bond, and for a while, it may have seemed enough. But love that relies on imbalance is love that is fragile, And eventually, the weight of giving without equal receiving becomes too heavy to carry. Think about what this really means. She didn't collapse because you left. She collapsed because she had been living in a relationship that asked her to stretch beyond what she could safely give, that demanded compromise without reciprocity, that required her to hide her dissatisfaction and her longing. She broke because the act of overgiving became a constant reminder that she was not valued on the same level she valued. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no explosive confrontations. She didn't make a scene because the scene had already happened internally, in the silent chambers of her mind where she questioned every choice, every word, every sacrifice. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people don't want to admit. When someone gives more than they receive, it's not just their time and energy that is depleted. It's their sense of identity. It's their confidence. It's their understanding of what they deserve. Overgiving creates an internal imbalance, a tension between who she truly is and who she feels she must be in order to be loved. And the longer she sustains it, the more the tension grows until something has to give. The break is inevitable, not because love has failed, but because self-respect has awakened. What she learned in that process is invaluable, but painful. She realized that love without balance is not love, it is endurance. She learned that you can care deeply for someone and still recognize when that care is being exploited or ignored. She learned that loyalty and patience are virtues, but they are meaningless when met with disregard. And most importantly, she learned that the person who overgives does not break under abandonment. They break under the quiet realization that they have compromised too much of themselves for someone who could not meet them equally. So, when you think about her silence, when you wonder why she didn't fight for you in the way you expected, remember this: the breaking wasn't about losing you. The breaking was about recognizing how much she had already lost trying to keep you. And once that realization hits, once the truth of imbalance is faced honestly, there is no returning to the old ways. The giving that was once abundant is now measured, intentional, protected. The self that was once secondary is now primary, and no absence or presence can change the clarity that has been forged in that pain. The lesson here is clear: love is not about endurance alone. It is about balance, reciprocity, and the courage to protect oneself while giving fully. Losing someone who overgave quietly is not the end of their story. It is the awakening of their strength. And the moment they realize they have given too much without return, they do not crumble, they evolve. They do not scream, they rebuild. And in that rebuilding lies a power so quiet, so complete, that it leaves a lasting impact on anyone who underestimated it. Because the truth is this: people don't break from loss, they break from imbalance, they break from compromise. They break from giving pieces of themselves to a place where those pieces were never truly valued. And when that breaking finally happens, it is silent, it is complete, and it is transformative. Detachment doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't appear overnight. It emerges slowly, like a quiet shift in the air that nobody notices until it becomes impossible to ignore. She didn't stop loving because she wanted to. She stopped loving the way she had loved because she realized that her attachment was costing her more than she could afford to give. Love, when it is unbalanced, becomes a silent tax on the soul. The more she invested without equal return, the more she felt pieces of herself eroding. And eventually, she reached a point where continuing to give without boundaries was no longer an option. Emotional detachment is rarely a choice. It is an evolution, a response to repeated patterns of neglect, inconsistency, or emotional unavailability. Think about what this really means. Detachment is not about cruelty or indifference. It is about self-preservation. When someone loves deeply, they risk being taken for granted. When that love is met with repeated disappointment, it teaches the heart a harsh lesson. You cannot pour from a cup that is constantly emptied without being refilled. She stopped tolerating imbalance, not because she stopped caring, but because she understood that her emotional energy is finite. She realized that being present for someone who cannot reciprocate in the same depth ultimately diminishes her own vitality. The awakening that comes with this realization is rarely visible to the outside world, but it is powerful, irreversible, and transformative. There is a misconception that detachment means she stopped feeling. That is false. She feels more now than ever, but her feelings are directed differently. They are directed inward. She protects her emotional boundaries with precision because she has learned the cost of emotional overexposure. The person who detaches is not heartless. They are hyper-aware. They are strategic in where they give, when they give, and to whom. Every word, every action, every moment of attention becomes deliberate. What may look like distance is actually wisdom in motion. It is a method of reclaiming control over a heart that was once stretched too thin. And here's the crucial point: detachment is a declaration, even if it is unspoken. It says, without words, I am no longer willing to sacrifice my emotional well-being for someone who cannot meet me where I am. It is not a punishment. It is not a strategy to make someone regret leaving. It is the natural outcome of a person recognizing that they have given too much of themselves to a situation that could not sustain it. And the beauty of this evolution is that it is permanent. Once the mind and the heart have aligned in this awareness, there is no going back. The emotional landscape has shifted, and with it comes a clarity that is both liberating and disarming. What she learned in this process is invaluable. She learned that love is not about possession, control, or blind endurance. It is about mutual respect, shared effort, and emotional reciprocity. She learned that detachment is not failure, it is an act of courage. It is the courage to say, I will not lose myself again. I will not surrender my peace for temporary affection. I will choose me. And in that courage lies her strength, a strength that may appear quiet, but is unyielding. It's important to recognize that detachment does not happen randomly. It is the culmination of repeated lessons, repeated disappointments, and repeated sacrifices that go unnoticed. She didn't wake up one morning and decide to stop being emotionally available. She reached a point where the pattern of giving without receiving forced her to draw boundaries, to protect the self she had nearly lost, and to honor her worth above anyone else's convenience. The silent power of detachment is often misunderstood. To the observer, it may seem like distance, apathy, or even coldness. But what it actually represents is clarity, self-respect, and the ability to prioritize one's own well-being without guilt. She does not need permission to protect herself. She does not need validation to know her worth. And she does not need to explain her withdrawal because it is rooted in truth. The truth that love without balance is unsustainable, and that preserving oneself is not only necessary, it is inevitable. So when you see someone withdraw quietly, when someone stops chasing, stops reacting, and stops giving without measure, understand this: it is not the absence of love. It is the presence of awareness. It is not weakness. It is power. And that power, once fully realized, changes everything. It rewrites relationships, it redefines boundaries, and it reshapes the way they interact with the world. Because detachment is not an act of anger. It is an act of awakening. It is the moment a person decides that their peace, their identity, and their emotional integrity are worth more than any temporary attachment. And once that moment arrives, nothing can undo it. Quiet loss is often misunderstood. Most people expect heartbreak to arrive in waves of tears, shouting, or visible chaos, but some of the deepest losses are silent. She didn't scream, she didn't demand attention, she didn't make her pain known, and that is exactly what makes her loss permanent. When someone leaves loudly, the world can respond, people can intervene, apologies can be offered, explanations can be given. There is still a chance for connection, for repair, for return. But when someone leaves quietly without fanfare, the impact is subtle, almost invisible, and yet it is final. The silence carries a weight that cannot be reversed. You must understand the difference between absence and withdrawal. Absence can be temporary, withdrawal is intentional. She didn't disappear because she stopped caring. She withdrew because she understood, finally, that her presence had been undervalued for too long. She realized that remaining emotionally available in a place where her needs, her boundaries, and her worth were ignored would only prolong her suffering. And so she stepped back, not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of necessity. Her withdrawal is not a cry for attention. It is a declaration of self-respect, a statement that she will no longer compromise herself to maintain someone else's comfort. This type of quiet loss is the most difficult to confront because it doesn't scream for acknowledgement. There is no dramatic confrontation, no opportunity to negotiate reconciliation. The person who remains silent has already made peace with being misunderstood. They have already internalized the lessons of imbalance, neglect, and overgiving, and they have applied those lessons decisively. What may appear as calm or indifference is actually an intricate internal process of self-preservation and emotional clarity. And when the time comes for them to fully detach, there is no going back. One of the most profound aspects of this kind of loss is that it leaves a lingering absence rather than a loud departure. You might not feel the immediate impact of her absence because it is subtle, but over time, the space she once occupied becomes undeniable. Her influence remains in memories, in the emotional habits she shaped in you, in the silent acknowledgement of her contributions that were never appreciated. The quietness amplifies the consequences because it forces reflection. It forces recognition of what was lost. And often, by the time the depth of the loss is realized, it is too late to reverse it. The permanence of quiet loss is not rooted in malice or revenge. She does not aim to punish. She simply moves forward with the lessons learned, and those lessons are firm and unwavering. Once she has experienced the cumulative effect of giving more than she received, of compromising her identity for connection, of loving quietly without acknowledgement, she does not return to the same dynamic. She does not reopen old wounds. She does not tolerate inconsistency or neglect. The person she once was, who loved without reserve, is no longer available. What remains is someone who loves wisely, intentionally, and selectively. And this is the point most people fail to see. Losing someone quietly is not the loss of a moment. It is the loss of a version of a person. It is the loss of a capacity for unconditional availability, of limitless patience, of unquestioned devotion. That version of her existed because the circumstances allowed it. When those circumstances changed, when imbalance persisted and her efforts were undervalued, that version ceased to exist. The quiet departure signifies a boundary that is final, a lesson learned that is permanent, and a self that will no longer be compromised. So, when you reflect on her silence, her calm exterior, her lack of visible reaction, understand this: her departure is not absence, it is transformation. Her quiet loss is the clearest statement she could make without saying a word. It is an unspoken message that emotional energy is precious, that self-respect cannot be ignored, and that love without reciprocity is unsustainable. And when someone leaves quietly, they are not inviting reconciliation, they are teaching a lesson that cannot be undone. The most important takeaway here is that quiet loss is irreversible because it is deliberate. It is deliberate in its timing, in its subtlety, and in its permanence. She has chosen to protect herself, and in doing so, she has ensured that the version of herself who overgave, who endured silently, will never be accessible again. This is not a punishment, it is evolution, it is growth, it is the strongest form of self-preservation there is. And when you witness or experience this type of loss, it should force reflection, not regret. It should teach the value of awareness, the cost of neglect, and the necessity of reciprocity in any meaningful connection, because in the end, quiet loss is not empty. It is final, it is deep, and it is transformative. It leaves a mark that cannot be erased. And anyone who has the awareness to recognize it will understand that the loss is permanent, not because of anger, not because of hate, but because of awakened self-respect and the decision to never again compromise the self for someone else's convenience.